What if I told you that the $400 fishing rod you just bought is the exact reason you are losing fish this spring? It sounds completely insane. We have all been brainwashed by the fishing industry into believing that ultimate sensitivity and stiff, high-end carbon fiber are the keys to catching more fish. But today, I'm going to reveal a hard truth that might just make you angry. For early spring fishing, downgrading to a worse, cheaper, less sensitive rod is actually the ultimate cheat code. In this video, we are breaking down the exact science and real-world mechanics of why a mushy, old-school stick will put more giant pre-spawn fish in your boat than any premium rod ever could. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will be digging through your garage for that dusty old fiberglass rod you abandoned years ago. So, drop a comment down below right now. What is the most expensive piece of fishing gear you bought that actually let you down? Let us get into it. For decades, fishermen have been locked in a gear race. Every single year, manufacturers release rods that are lighter, stiffer, and more sensitive than the last. The marketing tells us that if you cannot feel a bass breathing on your lure, you are missing fish. Because of this, many of us have packed our boats exclusively with high-modulus graphite rods. We throw out our old gear and do the exact same thing season after season, dragging these stiff broomsticks to the lake, even when the ice has barely melted. But spring fishing is a completely different game. The water is freezing, the fish are sluggish, and we are primarily throwing moving reaction baits like crankbaits and chatterbaits. Using ultra-sensitive gear in these specific conditions is a massive mistake that causes anglers to rip hooks out of mouths, miss short strikes, and lose the biggest fish of the year right at the boat. It is time to step back, look at the reality of the spring bite, and unlearn everything we thought we knew about fishing rod sensitivity. Picture this. It is early spring. The mist is rising off the water. You are holding a brand new $400 carbon fiber rod. It is so sensitive you can feel a fish breathing on your lure. You make a long cast, reel in slowly, and suddenly, bam! A massive strike. You set the hook with everything you have, but instead of a heavy weight, your lure comes flying right back at your face. You missed another one. What went wrong? You did everything right, and you bought the best gear money can buy. Well, what if I told you that your expensive, ultra-sensitive rod is exactly the reason you just lost that fish? It sounds crazy, right? We have been told for years that sensitivity is the ultimate goal in fishing gear. The fishing industry spends millions trying to convince us that stiffer, lighter, and more sensitive graphite blanks equal more fish in the boat. But spring fishing is a completely different beast. The water is cold, the fish are acting weird, and your reaction time is actually working against you. That high-dollar stick is actually your worst enemy right now. Today, we are breaking down the myth of sensitivity. We are going back to basics. I am going to show you why grabbing that heavy, mushy, old-school fiberglass rod from the back of your garage is the absolute best thing you can do for your spring fishing trips. Let us talk about the cold water factor. During the early spring, the water temperatures are barely creeping out of the winter chill. The bass, walleye, and pike are waking up, but they are not exactly athletes right now. They are sluggish. Their metabolism is slow. When they decide to eat, they do not always smash the bait with top speed and turn away aggressively like they do in the middle of the summer. Often they just kind of swim up behind your lure and inhale it lazily. Or they slap at it. When you are using an ultra-sensitive, extra-fast action rod, you feel that initial tick the exact millisecond the fish touches the bait. And what do? You react. You are a predator too, and your instincts kick in. You swing for the fences, but because the fish is moving slowly in that cold water, it has not fully engulfed the lure yet. Your highly sensitive rod caused you to pull the bait right out of the mouth of the fish before it had a chance to close its jaws. A cheaper, heavier, less sensitive rod has a natural delay. It forces you to wait. It does not transmit that tiny tick right away. By the time you actually feel the weight of the fish on a lower quality rod, the fish has already eaten the bait and turned its head. That built-in delay is the ultimate cold water cheat code. Now think about the most popular baits we throw in the spring. We are talking about crankbaits, jerkbaits, chatterbaits, and spinnerbaits. These are reaction baits. You are moving them constantly. They all have one thing in common. They use treble hooks, or heavy single hooks, that require the fish to hook itself when it turns. Let us focus on crankbaits for a minute. When you are burning a crankbait over rocks, or ripping it through early spring grass, you want the fish to grab it and swim away. If you use a stiff, high modulus carbon rod, there is absolutely zero give. The rod does not bend easily. When the base hits the crankbait, it hits a brick wall. The hooks do not penetrate properly because the stiffness of the rod actually bounces the lure away from the fish. It is simple physics. A softer, less sensitive rod, often called a parabolic rod or a fiberglass rod, bends deeply all the way through the blank. When the fish hits, the rod bows. It absorbs the shock. It gives the fish the extra split second it needs to suck in the bait fully. The fish practically hooks itself against the soft tension of the rod. You do not even need to set the hook violently. Just keep reeling. That mushy feeling that you normally hate is actually doing all the hard work for you. It is nature acting as an automatic shock absorber. Let us dive deeper into the mechanics of treble hooks. Almost every springtime reaction bait features treble hooks. Think about your favorite lipless crankbait that you throw in late February and March. Treble hooks are notoriously problematic because they have very shallow gaps. They do not grab a thick piece of meat like a big single Texas rig hook does. They usually just grab skin, the lip, or the soft tissue inside the mouth of the fish. When you hook a big, heavy pre-spawn base on a treble hook, it is going to fight wildly. It will thrash its head, jump, and make sudden surges toward the bottom. If you are holding a stiff, highly sensitive graphite rod, every single head shake transfers directly to the hook points. Because the rod does not bend enough to absorb those violent head shakes, the stiff carbon fiber acts like a crowbar. It literally pries the small treble hooks right out of the soft mouth of the fish. You will see the fish jump, you will hear a splash, and your lure will come sailing back to you. I guarantee you have experienced this heartbreak on the water. A worse, less sensitive, flexible rod prevents this entirely. It stays bent. It acts like a bungee cord, keeping constant, even pressure on the treble hooks. It never gives the fish the slack or the rigid leverage it needs to throw the bait. Have you ever been standing on the bank or on the deck of your boat, throwing a heavy spinnerbait in the muddy spring water? You are trying to slow roll it around some submerged wood. Suddenly you feel a hard thump. It is a massive fish. You swing hard and start reeling. But something feels off. The fish is shaking its head violently, and you are terrified of losing it. The problem with high-end sensitive rods is that they give you too much information. You feel every single vibration. You feel the blade spinning. You feel the lure bumping into every twig. And you feel every tiny movement the fish makes during the fight. This sensory overload actually causes anglers to panic. It makes you overreact. You feel a bump and you set the hook on a log. Or you feel the fish shake its head and you start reeling way too fast, forcing the fish to the surface before it is ready. This leads to broken lines, bent hooks, and lost trophies. When you use a heavier, less responsive rod, you are insulated from all that extra noise. You just feel the steady, heavy pull of a good fish. You stay calmer. You fight the fish smoother. Sometimes, ignorance really is bliss. By muting the unnecessary vibrations, a lower quality rod helps you focus on just keeping a steady bend and steering the fish to the net safely. Another massive advantage of downgrading your rod in the spring is casting distance and accuracy with lighter lures. Spring brings wind. A lot of wind. You are often casting directly into a stiff breeze, trying to reach a shallow flat, where the fish are warming themselves in the afternoon sun. Many high-end fast-action rods are incredibly stiff at the tip. They are designed for bottom contact baits like jigs, where you need a rigid lever to drive a thick hook through a plastic worm. But when you tie on a light spring crankbait or a small swim bait, that stiff rod tip refuses to bend. It does not load up during the casting motion. It is like trying to cast a peanut with a broomstick. You end up forcing the cast, throwing out your shoulder, and getting terrible backlashes in your bait casting reel. A softer, less sensitive rod, especially one made of a fiberglass composite, loads beautifully. The weight of the light lure naturally bends the flexible rod tip way back behind your head. When you snap your wrist forward, the rod acts like a catapult. It launches that light bait into the wind with zero extra effort from you. You get incredibly long, smooth casts. And in the spring, keeping your bait in the strike zone longer because you cast it further is a guaranteed way to multiply your catch rate. Let us talk about the concept of the visual bite. In early spring, the water is often stained or muddy from heavy rains and melting snow. The fish rely heavily on their lateral line to find moving baits. When they strike, it is not always a violent impact that sends a shock wave down your line. Sometimes the fish just pushes the bait forward. You lose the feeling of the lure vibrating. On a highly sensitive rod, you might misinterpret this as your lure fouling on a leaf or a piece of grass. You might just blindly rip the rod tip up to clear the weed, thereby snatching the bait away from the base. But when you are using a softer, less sensitive rod, you are forced to rely on different cues. You start watching your line. You start watching the actual bend in the rod tip. A softer rod tip will physically load up and bend visually before you even feel the weight in your hands. You will see the rod tip slowly bow downward. This visual cue gives you that extra half second to confirm the fish has the bait. You can smoothly sweep the rod to the side and lock the fish in. Experienced anglers know that in the spring, seeing the bite on a soft rod tip is far more reliable than waiting to feel a sharp tap on a stiff blank. It is time to completely break a major myth about fishing gear. The myth is that expensive means better for every situation. We see professional tournament anglers on television flipping fish into their boats with custom rods that cost more than a car payment. But what they do not tell you in the commercials is that those same professionals have completely different, cheaper feeling rods hidden in their rod lockers, specifically for spring reaction fishing. The fishing industry markets high modulus carbon because it sounds advanced. It sounds like aerospace technology. It is lightweight, crispy, and highly sensitive. And for dragging a jig in 30 feet of water during the summer, it is absolutely essential. But using that same space-age technology to throw a shallow diving crankbait in early April is a fundamental mismatch of tools. It is like using a surgical scalpel to chop firewood. You need a blunt instrument for a blunt job. A heavier, less sensitive composite rod is the right tool for the job. It provides the necessary cushion. It prevents the hooks from tearing out. It helps you hook up with short-striking fish. Stop letting marketing dictate your fishing success. The fish do not know how much you paid for your rod. They only know how the bait acts when they try to eat it. Consider the aggressive pre-spawn feeding frenzy. When the water temperatures finally hit the low 50s, fish go on a massive feeding spree to prepare for the spawn. They are aggressive, but they are also incredibly clumsy. They will swipe at a passing jerkbait, miss it completely, turn around and swipe at it again. If you are fishing a stiff, super-sensitive rod, you will feel that first missed strike. You will feel the fish smack the side of the bait, and your natural instinct will be to set the hook hard. Because your rod is so fast and stiff, you will yank that lure 5 feet out of the strike zone. The clumsy fish turns around to hit it again, but the bait is gone. You ruined your own chance at a follow-up bite. Now imagine the same scenario with a softer, slower, less sensitive rod. The fish swipes at the bait and misses. You feel a dull thump, but because the rod is spongy, it does not jerk the bait completely out of the water. The lure just stutters and stays in the general area. The rod absorbs your jerky reaction. The fish circles back instantly, sees the bait hovering right there, and absolutely crushes it. The slower response time of the rod kept the bait in the danger zone long enough for the fish to correct its own mistake. Let us talk about the material itself. Fiberglass. For decades, fiberglass was the only real option for fishing rods. It was heavy, it was thick, and it was virtually indestructible. Then graphite came along and revolutionized the industry by making rods lighter and more sensitive. Everyone threw their old fiberglass rods into the garbage or left them to gather dust in the attic. But here is the secret that the smartest anglers are figuring out right now. Fiberglass is making a massive comeback for spring fishing. Why? Because fiberglass has a naturally slow recovery rate. When you bend a graphite rod, it wants to snap back to being perfectly straight immediately. That fast recovery is what tears hooks out. When you bend a fiberglass rod, it takes its time returning to straight. It is lazy. That lazy recovery is the magic ingredient for spring crankbait fishing. It means that when a big fish thrashes, the rod stays bent and yields to the fish, keeping the treble hooks firmly pinned in the mouth. Today, companies are blending modern lightweight materials with old-school fiberglass to create composite rods. These give you the exact mushy, insensitive, slow action of your grandfather's old rod, but without the back-breaking weight. Digging out an old glass rod is the smartest move you can make this season. Another situation where a bad rod shines is fishing lipless crankbaits around submerged vegetation. In early spring, the new weed growth is just starting to tickle the bottom of the lake. The classic technique is to cast a lipless crankbait out, let it sink to the grass, and slowly reel it. When you feel the lure tick the grass, you give the rod a sharp upward rip to pop the bait free. This sudden ripping action triggers explosive reaction strikes from fish hiding in the weeds. If your rod is too stiff and sensitive, it rips the bait too violently. The lure shoots up way too fast, looks unnatural, and spooks the fish. A softer, less sensitive rod provides a much smoother, sweeping rip. When you pull up on a mushy rod to clear the grass, the rod bends first, loading up energy, and then slingshots the lure out of the weeds in a smooth, gliding motion. This looks exactly like a stunned baitfish fleeing from cover. The strike almost always happens right after the bait breaks free from the grass. Because you are using a softer rod, when the fish inhales the falling bait, the rod naturally bows to the weight of the fish, hooking it securely. You cannot replicate this smooth, natural tearing action with a rigid graphite stick. Think about the physical toll that high-sensitivity gear takes on your body. When you are power fishing in the spring, you might make 1,000 casts in a single day. You are constantly winding resistance baits like big spinnerbaits, heavy vibrating jigs, and deep-diving crankbaits. A highly sensitive carbon rod transfers every single ounce of that vibration directly into your hands, wrists, and elbows. After 6 hours of feeling a heavy chatterbait thump through a rigid rod blank, your arm is going to be completely fatigued. Your wrist will ache. Your focus will drop. You will start making sloppy casts and half-hearted hook sets. A lower quality, less sensitive rod acts as an insulator. It dampens all of that heavy vibration. The soft blank absorbs the constant thumping of the lure before it ever reaches your hand. You can wind a massive, hard-pulling crankbait all day long without getting tired. This means you can stay on the water longer. You stay sharper, more focused, and ready for when the big bite finally comes at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Endurance is a massive part of spring fishing success, and using a rod that absorbs the shock instead of transmitting it to your joints is a total game changer. Let us look at a very specific spring fishing scenario. You are targeting a shallow flat with a square bill crankbait. The bottom is littered with chunky rocks, lay-down logs, and submerged stumps. The goal of a square bill is to crash it directly into this heavy cover, deflecting off the wood and rock to trigger a strike. If you fish this cover with an ultra-sensitive, extra-fast graphite rod, you are going to get hung up constantly. Every time the lure hits a log, the stiff rod forces the hooks to dig straight into the wood. You will spend half your day driving your boat over to retrieve snagged lures. Now, switch to a softer, dead-feeling rod. When the square bill crashes into a stump, the soft tip of the rod immediately yields. It folds backward. This momentary slack allows the buoyant crankbait to naturally back up and float over the obstruction. The rod physically forgives your mistake of reeling too fast into the cover. It helps the bait walk over the logs instead of driving the hooks into them. By getting snagged less, you spend more time actually fishing. Your lure spends more time swimming properly in the strike zone. And you avoid spooking the entire area by driving the boat right over the heads of the fish to retrieve your bait. Let us talk about the battle at the side of the boat. This is the danger zone. You have hooked a giant spring bass. You have played it perfectly all the way to the boat. The fish sees the net, panics, and makes one final violent surge directly under the hull. This split-second moment breaks more hearts than anything else in fishing. If you are wielding a stiff, highly sensitive rod, there is nowhere for the energy of that sudden lunge to go except straight to your fishing line. If your drag is set just a little too tight, or if your line has a tiny nick in it from rubbing on a rock, the line will instantly snap. A loud pop, and your trophy is gone forever. But if you are holding a worse, softer, less responsive rod, that sudden lunge is instantly absorbed by the deep parabolic bend of the blank. The rod doubles over, touching the water, taking all the strain off the line and the knots. It physically exhausts the fish without demanding perfect reel drag management from you. The rod does the fighting for you. It covers up your mistakes. In the chaos of netting a fish by yourself, having a rod that acts as an automatic shock absorber is the difference between an epic photo and a story about the one that got away. There is a psychological aspect to using less sensitive gear that nobody talks about. When you spend $500 on a premium rod, you feel a psychological pressure to use it for everything. You want to justify the cost. You convince yourself that because you can feel a fish breathe, you have a massive advantage. But this creates a mental trap. You become obsessed with feeling the bite rather than reading the conditions. You stop paying attention to the water temperature, the wind direction, and the bait fish activity. You rely entirely on tactile feedback. By deliberately choosing to use a cheaper, older, less sensitive rod, you force your brain to engage differently with the environment. You become a hunter again. You start watching your line for subtle jumps. You look for flashes of fish rolling near the structure. You pay attention to how your lure changes the rhythm of your reeling. You rely on your eyes and your intuition rather than just waiting for a sharp shock to hit your hands. This old-school approach connects you more deeply to the water. It makes you a more observant, well-rounded angler. You stop relying on a technological crutch and start relying on your actual fishing skills. Let us address the bank fishermen out there. Spring is the absolute best time of the year to walk the shoreline. The fish pull up shallow to feed and spawn, making them incredibly accessible to anyone without a boat. But walking the bank means beating through thick brush, sliding down muddy embankments, and navigating low-hanging trees. You do not want to be carrying a delicate, high-modulus carbon rod in these conditions. One accidental whack against an oak tree branch, and that expensive rod will shatter into a million pieces on your next cast. High-end graphite is notoriously brittle. A cheaper, heavier, less sensitive fiberglass or composite rod is built like a tank. You can bang it against rocks, drop it in the mud, and drag it through the briars without a second thought. It is practically bulletproof. When you hook a fish from the bank, you often do not have a net. You have to literally drag the fish up onto the mud or hoist it over a patch of cattails. A softer, durable rod handles this heavy lifting perfectly without snapping. It gives the bank angler the rugged durability required for real-world, muddy boots fishing. You can fish aggressively and confidently, knowing your gear will not break when things get rough. Now, let us combine this rod strategy with the right fishing line. To get the absolute maximum benefit out of a less sensitive rod in the spring, you need to pair it with fluorocarbon or monofilament line, not braided line. Braided line has absolutely zero stretch. If you pair zero stretch braid with a stiff graphite rod, you have created a nightmare combination for spring treble hook baits. The fish will bounce right off your lure, but when you pair a stretchy fluorocarbon or monofilament line with a soft, forgiving fiberglass rod, you create the ultimate spring fishing system. The line stretches slightly when the fish hits. Then the soft rod begins to bend gracefully. This double shock-absorbing system means the fish feels absolutely no unnatural resistance when it inhales your crankbait. The fish thinks it just ate a real bait fish and closes its mouth tight. By the time you notice the heavy weight on your end and begin to sweep the rod, the hooks are already buried deep in the corner of the mouth. You have completely eliminated the human error of setting the hook too early. The combination of stretchy line and a mushy rod does all the heavy lifting for you. It is practically an automatic fish-catching machine. Consider the size of the fish you are targeting in the spring. This is the time of year when you have the greatest chance of catching your personal best. The females are loaded with eggs and are at their absolute heaviest weight of the entire year. A 10-pound bass fights very differently than a 2-pound bass. A massive fish uses its sheer weight, and violent, heavy head thumps to escape. If you try to bully a giant pre-spawn female with a rigid, high-power graphite stick, you are going to rip a massive hole in her mouth. The sheer force of her head shakes against a stiff rod will carve out a hole the size of a quarter around the hook point. The moment you give her a single inch of slack line, the hook will literally fall right out of that giant hole, and she will swim away. A less sensitive, deeply bending rod maintains constant, gentle pressure. It never creates that massive hole in the tissue of the fish. It acts like a steady spring, keeping the hook pinned securely against the jawbone without tearing the flesh. If you truly want to land the biggest fish of your life this spring, you need a rod that yields to the power of the fish rather than fighting against it. Think about how a bad rod forces you to use the proper hook set for reaction baits. When you're using a sensitive rod for jig fishing, you use a snap hook set. You drop the rod tip, reel up the slack, and snap your arms upward as hard as you can. But if you do that with a crankbait or a spinnerbait, you will rip the lure out of the water. When you use a soft, insensitive rod, a snap hook set literally does nothing. The rod just folds over in a useless arc, and no power transfers to the hook. The bad rod forces you to learn the sweep hook set. When you feel the heavy, mushy weight of a fish on a slow rod, you simply lean back smoothly. You sweep the rod horizontally to the side while continuing to turn the handle of your reel. This smooth, continuous pressure slides the treble hooks perfectly into the lip of the fish. The lack of sensitivity trains your muscle memory to react properly. It cures you of the nasty habit of jerking the rod violently. By forcing you to sweep and wind, the cheaper rod actually makes you a far better, more technically sound angler when it comes to throwing moving baits. So, how do you actually put this into practice on your next fishing trip? Go to your garage right now. Look past your expensive, shiny, high-modulus carbon fiber rods. Look for that older, heavier composite or fiberglass rod. Maybe it is an ugly stick. Maybe it is an old crankbait rod you bought 10 years ago and abandoned because it felt too heavy. Dust it off. Tie on a red spring craw crankbait, a heavy spinnerbait, or a vibrating jig. Take it out to the lake when the water is cold and the wind is blowing. Make a long cast. Feel how beautifully the rod loads up and launches the bait. Feel how it dampens the harsh vibrations of the lure. And when that first sluggish pre-spawn giant inhales your bait, do not panic. Do not jerk. Just let the rod load up, feel the heavy, mushy weight, and gently sweep the rod to the side. Watch as the rod stays bent, absorbing every violent headshake at the side of the boat. I promise you, once you experience how forgiving and effective this old-school approach is, you will never pick up a stiff, expensive rod for spring reaction fishing ever again. Sometimes, the best upgrade you can make to your fishing arsenal is a deliberate downgrade. Let us wrap this up. The biggest takeaway here is that sensitivity is not always your friend. In fact, the most unexpected twist in all of spring fishing is that a delayed reaction is your greatest asset. By using a worse, less sensitive, deeply bending rod, you are literally forcing yourself to slow down. You are giving sluggish cold water fish the time they need to fully inhale a moving bait. You are eliminating the human error of setting the hook too early, and you are creating an automatic shock absorber that keeps tiny treble hooks buried deep during a violent fight. This entirely changes how you approach the water. It takes the pressure off having lightning-fast reflexes and puts the focus back on letting the gear do the work for you. Downgrading your rod makes you a smoother, more efficient, and ultimately more successful spring angler. Thank you so much for watching and for keeping an open mind today. If this video changed the way you look at your fishing gear, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. And before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you going to keep using your expensive stiff rods for crankbaits? Or are you finally going to give that old ugly fiberglass stick a second chance? Let us debate it down below.